The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome to the podcast today, everybody. Mondo Gonzalez here, sitting across from Josh Peck. Josh, this is, I think, our first podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, first time doing this.
In this kind of, co-worker partnership, which is good.
Yeah, you've been on my podcast plenty of times, and I've been on Prophecy Watchers plenty of times. And This is the first time we're both here at the Prophecy Watchers podcast.
This is good. We're gonna discuss an interesting topic, and I've written an article about the 24 elders and did a DVD, and Josh has written about this in his new book, which we'll highlight in a moment. And we want to just talk about who this group is, and the exciting things about it. And for those that might not know, a couple helpful reminders that we have our upcoming conference in Colorado Springs, June 27th through the 30th, and it is going to be a great time. There's not many seats left. We're almost at the sellout point. But so if you've been praying about it and thinking about it, I would encourage you to jump on in. You can go to watchersweekendcolorado.com or just go to prophecywatchers.com, and you can see the link there. And also, if people are not able to make it, we encourage you to check out the live stream. That'll be available for a whole year, which would be great. A couple other events that are happening in October. I'll be joining Billy Crone and Brandon Holthouse and Ken Michael from Olive Tree Ministries. We will be hosting a Revelation Churches tour, and then also going on a biblical tour of Paul's missionary journey to Athens, Greece, and Troas and Miletus, and a couple other spots there. If you're interested in that, you can go to prophecywatchers.com again, and just click on the events tab. And if you scroll down to October, you'll see a link there which will take you to the itinerary of all the different places. Again, seeing how the gospel spread to Europe, and then, as we know, we're kind of the recipients of that. And then finally, just a reminder that we have our upcoming conference in Branson, Missouri, December 6th or 8th. And that's, again, we're going to have over 20 speakers there. And, Josh, it's interesting in thinking about this. And again, if people are interested, prophecywatchers.com, you can see that. But people are asking, wondering, well, why are we doing all these conferences? And I think for us, we realize that Ephesians 5:16 says, "Redeem the time."
Yep.
And we know that with COVID, things shut down.
Yeah.
And so there's no guarantee we could have a conference. As we know, conferences were shut down during that time. And so we want to make sure that we can redeem the opportunities that we have, because none of us believe that the World Economic Forum or the globalists are just sitting around going, "Well, I guess it didn't work out."
Yeah, we'll give up.
Yeah, we'll give up. They are not giving up for sure. And so we want to take advantage of the time that we have. And so, Josh, you wrote about this in your new book. So kind of give everybody an insight into your new book, and then I have a couple follow-up questions on the 24 elders, and we're going to deep dive into this.
Sure. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a book called Lost Prophecies of Qumran. And it's funny because in the introduction of that book, I usually write my introductions last. I like knowing what I'm introducing.
Yeah.
So the book was all done, and the last part was the introduction. And in that, I wrote wow, this has been a great journey, but for me, this journey of discovery is kind of over. But for you, it's just beginning. The reader, hopefully, you can get as excited about it as I can. Well, I was wrong. My journey of discovery was far from over when it comes to the Essenes and Qumran and the amazing Dead Sea Scrolls that they left behind. And so in the introduction to the new book, I kind of explained, I wasn't done the way I thought I was, and in the past 3 or 4 years, I've compiled a lot more information. So I wanted to update and expand that book, and that's done now, and it's called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it's actually in 2 volumes. I originally had it in one book, but it was 760 some odd pages after all was said and done. And I ordered one author copy, so there's only one in existence of that huge volume, but the thing is so big. I mean, it's going to be hard for people to read. I mean, it's not even that dense of a book. It's easy to read, easy to follow along, but it's just too big. I mean, what if somebody wants to take it on a plane or something? It's huge. So Well, Bob Ulrich had the genius idea. Why don't you just split it into 2 volumes, and you can have volume 1, volume 2. And I was looking at the book, and I was like, naturally, it kind of already is split up this way anyway. The first half of the book is a lot of the history of the Essenes and the Qumran community and the Zadok priests and like all that, with a little bit of prophecy. And then the second half is mostly prophecy with a little bit of history. So splitting it into two volumes was really genius. So those are both out now. And of course, the best place that people should pick it up is prophecywatchers.com. And I know that you guys just put in an order for some, so I don't know if it's in the store yet, but maybe by the time this is out, it will be. Mm-hmm. And of course, I always tell people, don't support Jeff Bezos. you can get it on Amazon, but don't do that. Wait and get it at prophecywatchers.com. It's better to support a great prophecy ministry like that. So really, it's just it's an updated and expanded version of that book from 3 or 4 years ago. Lot of new information and a lot of new insights, and it was a blast to write. And I'm also very glad that it's done and it's out now.
that's kind of how I last summer I spent almost every day just trying to finalize the Red Heifer book, and I was like, it was great. You get done and you're like, okay, I need a rest. Yep. Because you're just so that time. There's a lot of time factors on things, but so in the book, you we won't get into the details, but why did you bring in? Because we'll do that in a minute. But why did you talk about the 24 elders? How did they come into play? Yeah,
so it's really interesting. The Dead Sea Scrolls have a lot of writings about the temple, and one of their beliefs was that the reason that it was so important to do certain rituals on certain days in the temple, it wasn't just because God said so. Of course, that's reason enough, but it was because they had this belief that time runs the same on earth as it does in heaven, and in heaven the angels are performing heavenly temple duties there. Of course, they're not sacrificing animals. We don't really know all of what they're doing. We get little hints of it throughout Revelation, but we're not told explicitly what the angels are doing. But they're doing these rituals at the same time, which makes sense. If the temple is just a shadow, if the earthly temple is just a shadow of the heavenly temple, then it makes sense that would all be in line. And also, so that plus the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which I spent a lot of time in the book talking about. Basically, it was the Essenes had this belief that there were 6,000 years of human history and in their calendar, and it's the same calendar that the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation uses. So you can use this to map out the days of the flood and actually see what days these land on. But you can also do it with prophecy. So in the last part of the book, and what we're talking about today comes from one of the last chapters, but I try to use the Dead Sea Scroll calendar to piece together a rough kind of timeline of the tribulation. So, for example, one thing that Christians sometimes talk about is, okay, well, the two witnesses, do they come in the first half or the second half of the tribulation? And that's a big debate, and has been since I was a kid. But with the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, we can actually determine it has to be the first half, because the day counts don't work out if not. This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but in their calendar they have what's called a leap week. So we have a leap day every 4 years or so. Well, every 5 or 6 years they would have a leap week to reset their calendar. So within a 7-year tribulation, within a 7-year period, you're going to have one leap week somewhere in there. The leap week, as it turns out, is in the first half. It can't be the second half because it throws off all the prophetic counts and it doesn't work. But if it's in the first half, then all of the day counts with the prophetic day counts with the two witnesses lines up perfectly. So we can determine that they come sometime in the first half. So as I was piecing all this together, I realized, well, we got to put the rapture in here somewhere. Where does that fit? And it does seem like now in the Dead Sea Scrolls there isn't anything explicit about the timing of the rapture, but it's all consistent with a pre-trib rapture. They have in the Dead Sea Scrolls they talk about these figures called famous men, and that's probably not the best translation in the world, but in the translation I have, and I don't know how to read the original languages, so I have to go by the translations I have. But when you look at the descriptions, they're with the Messiah at this big end times battle, and and they're immortal, and they're not angels. And it's like, well, who else are they? I mean, they're glorified human beings. They're us essentially. And there's other places that talk about these famous men. Well, when I was reading about some of their descriptions, it really seemed to match the 24 elders and the descriptions that they have and what they're doing. Because the famous men have something to do with like songs and praise. It's part of their job. Well, we read that about the 24 elders too. Also, sometimes they're called the Shining Ones in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, yeah.
And we see that I believe somewhere in Daniel as
Daniel
well.
12 and Matthew 13, both.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is all the same group of people. It's us essentially. So while I was going through all that, I decided, I really got to deal with this 24 elders thing, because not only does it connect with these other terms that the Dead Sea Scrolls use, but I'm a pre-trib rapture believer, and this I think is one of our best evidences, because if this is right, if we can positively identify the 24 elders as glorified Christians, it can't be any other position. It can't, because the 24 elders are already there with their crowns, with their song, with their white robes. They're already there seated
on thrones.
Yep. And before Jesus even gets the scroll. So that by definition is pre-tribulation. It would have to be. So I thought, well, this is just too good to not include in the book. So I went through, and I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of this, but I went through and just said, okay, well, what attributes did the 24 elders have? How are they described? And do we see those descriptions anywhere else in the Bible? And actually we do, in like literally the previous chapter from when the 24 elders are introduced in Revelation 4.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. And when we think about as you said, there's a lot of debates on who these are. And so the first thing I want to do is share, and again, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, but G.K. Beale, he wrote a book in the New International Greek Testament commentary. He, great scholar, great New Testament scholar, and he summarized. He wrote a commentary on the Book of Revelation. I don't recommend it because he's not really. He doesn't take it as in a futuristic way, but he kind of, as a lot of scholars do, they try to kind of stand above the fray of all these, these people, the dispensational and the preterists and everything. But one of the things that he did good in there was he highlighted the options. Mm-hmm. So here are the variety of potential options as given by him, as summarized. We'll say that I'll say it summarized by him in his commentary Revelation. Number one, that the 24 elders are stars that are like in the sense of constellations. They even though we know there's 12 zodiacal constellations, but it provides a astrological background, and I think he pulls some of that from Revelation 12. The sign in heaven. Yeah. And number two, they could be 24 angels. Number three, they could be Old Testament saints. Number four, they are angelic heavenly representatives. So they're angels again, but they're representatives of all saints of all time. Number five, they are the patriarchs and apostles, representing the Old Testament and New Testament saints together. Number six, they are representatives of the prophetic revelation of the 24 books of the Old Testament. So
gotta allegorize quite a bit to make that work.
And then it's interesting that, and then another one, so I'll add on here, so that's end quote. Another one that some people think is that based on Revelation 21 and 22, where you have the gates and the walls of the heavenly city, where you have listed the 12 tribes, and then you have listed the 12 apostles.
Yeah.
So that particular viewpoint is that, since the end of Revelation mentions those two groups, not the patriarchs specifically, but the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, therefore, there it is. You got your 24. Bring it back to Revelation 4, and that's the identity of the 24. But it's interesting too that in his commentary, he doesn't list as an option that the church.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? The one that he leaves out.
Yep.
And again, I think I wouldn't call it a particularly dispensational, but it is dispensational. But a lot of scholars like this don't necessarily quote dispensational.
Yeah, very true. And most people that I come across, and I used to believe this for a long time too, is that the most likely answer is probably the 12 patriarchs and then the 12 apostles. But when you really dig down into it, there's a difference between the church, the bride of Christ, and then what sometimes is called like the friend of the bridegroom, or we would say like the best man.
Yep.
When Renald Showers has an excellent book on that, and I'm blanking on the title right now. I have it at home, but he goes through the whole allegory of the Jewish wedding and how that perfectly symbolizes like the rapture and us getting our rewards in heaven and all of this stuff. But from my understanding, and there's different ways to look at it, and I did write about this and why I believe it in the book. But from my understanding, when we get raptured, that's the church. It seems like Old Testament saints, their resurrection or their reward or however that works comes at the end of the tribulation when Jesus comes back. So they wouldn't have their, the rewards that we see, the things that we see that the 24 elders have, the crowns and the white robes and stuff. It doesn't seem like the Old Testament saints would have gotten that yet. That comes later. So to me, the only group that matches, and especially, and we can go through all these, but especially. They have a song that they're singing, and they're singing this song about how they've been redeemed by his blood. And, well, that's not angels.
For sure.
Jesus didn't die for angels. We know the deal with angels. They don't have any kind of redemption plan. It's just if they fall, they're fallen, that's it. No hope of any kind of reconciliation or forgiveness for that. So angels can't be singing that. One of the other main attributes, too, that stands out to me is that they're seated. Now, we know that we as Christians were promised a position with Christ, that we can be seated and rule with him. Angels are never promised that. And actually, you never see angels seated.
No, you don't.
You only ever see angels standing all throughout the Bible. And it's a position of authority to be able to be seated with Christ. And that's something special and unique for believers. So, I went through and one of the other main things too is when you're just reading Revelation from chapter 1 and on, in chapters 2 and 3 you see Jesus make a lot of promises to these churches, to Christians, and he's saying basically like if you just hold on and if you overcome, he uses that word a lot too. If you overcome, then you'll get the crown of life, or you'll get white robes, and he says all these things. You'll be able to rule and judge with me and stuff like that. Well, then so that's 2 and 3, and then chapter 4 chapter 4 and 5 we're introduced to the 24 elders, and it gives the same exact descriptions. Now, how confusing would that be if they're not Christians? It would seem like John would have said like, hey, I know this sounds a lot like what Jesus promised, but just so you know, this is a totally different group. These aren't us. Like, it seems like he would have made that distinction, but since he didn't, I think he knew that it was just obvious. We just got done reading chapters 2 and 3, and we see all the same things, that when we see those in these 24 elders, it's got to be them. It's got to be us in glorified bodies. And again, if that's the case, I don't see any way around it. It has to be a pre-trib rapture. I mean, what you can take any other argument you want. Some might say, but what about this? What about the angels and the gathering and all that? It's like, all of that aside, we can talk about all those other side issues, but this one, if these are glorified Christians, then it absolutely has to be pre-trib, no way around it.
Yep, 100%. And as we think about this, the other viewpoints, mid-trib, pre-wrath, post-trib, they're all going to have to come up with a different level of understanding of the 24 elders. Yeah. I think, too, one of the things that I think gives us a understanding, and that is when in Revelation 1:19, we see the outline that Jesus gave. He says, therefore, write the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. And so you have a past, present, future there, which is very important because, what people need to remember is that the impression that I get is that John either wrote 7 separate copies of the book of Revelation, which were sent to each church, right? Because Jesus says, I want you to write this to the church at Philadelphia or the church at Ephesus. And so he at least wrote each of them, maybe, remember every church at least got a separate letter to some degree because he was writing specifically to them. Did it include all the rest of the chapters of Revelation? I imagine that it seems like it would. He had time. He was on the island of Patmos. But the outline that he gives there in Revelation 1:19 sets the stage. This phrase metatauta, after these things, is very, very clear.
Yeah.
He says, okay, write the things which you've seen, chapter 1. Write the things which is the churches. Here's your problems you're having.
2 and 3.
Yeah. And then chapter 4:1 is metatauta, and which tells you, okay, after these things, John, he's in the Spirit. He hears the voice come up. He's up there, and boom, he's immediately in the throne room. And that's one of the things that I think, in the sense of a lot of people say, well, you can't finalize the chronology of the book of Revelation, and there is some chronological nuances there, because we know, like chapter 7, chapter 11, 12, they're all parenthetical. They kind of they step back for a moment and give this bird's eye view. But there is chronology. Obviously, there's a chronology of the second seal, or the second trumpet, or the second bowl happening after the first one. Right? So there is this chronology there. And so even the outline itself of the book of Revelation, metatauta, chapter 4, verse 1, is after the things which are the churches. And now, one of the things that I wrote about, which I get your thoughts on, is that if we look, one of the things that's striking to me is we have a throne room scene in chapter 4 and 5. But what I wanted to do was, well, let's compare that with Isaiah chapter 6, or even Ezekiel 1, or even Exodus, where you have kind of these throne room scenes, primarily Isaiah 6, and you have these 4 living creatures, you have the 4 cherubim, whatever, or even Daniel 7. But there's in the Old Testament, there is no group of 24. Anywhere around the throne. You got the living creatures, you got the other angels, you got the attendant angels, you have the Son of Man, but yet no 24. But yet in the New Testament, at metatauta, after these things, John comes up, and there's these group of 24. It's like, hey, where'd these guys come from? They're not found anywhere else in the Bible. So let's develop that a little bit. Does that have any sort of persuasion?
Oh yeah, big time. Because you would think if they were some kind of spiritual class of angel or something like that, we should have seen some kind of mention. And then why use the word elder? Because all throughout the New Testament, when elder is used, and in the book I list a variety of different verses to show this, but when elder is used, like specifically in Acts and stuff, it's usually just talking about like Christians, like church leaders, stuff like that. So why would John use that term? It's either John is like trying to trick people. He's like trying to be trying to use terms to make somebody think a certain way. It's just, John wasn't dumb. He knew what he was describing, and if it wasn't Christians, glorified Christians, why did he use those words? It would be almost like purposely deceitful, Yep. And because he could have said angels, or he could have said seraphim or cherubim, or like any number of things. He knows what angels are. He talks about angels all throughout Revelation, and but he makes a clear distinction between the 4 living creatures around the throne and the 24 elders in that throne scene. These are 2 different groups. If they were of the same group, if they were all angels, I don't see why separate them into these 2 groups. And then, but yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's a really good point. That these 24 elders, the only reference we get to anything even remotely like this is in the Old Testament. There were 24 courses for the temple.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and that to me, I think lends more evidence to this idea of the 24 elders being glorified Christians as being true, because as I said before, the heavenly temple is like the real thing, and then the earthly temple is the standard.
It's a copy. We know that in Hebrews that it's a copy. And even in Exodus, he says, God tells Moses, make it according to the pattern that I showed you. And so, if the priests serve the shadow on the copy, that's the whole theology of Hebrews. And that's why in Revelation 16 we see the ark, right? There's a real ark in heaven. It's not the earthly ark. It's not the earthly ark. So we have this pattern for sure.
Yeah. So we get this pattern of these 24 courses of temple duties that the priests in the Old Testament would perform. So it makes sense to me if God wants his temple run like that. Well, that's the shadow, and then, but of course, at that time, that wasn't the church age. There weren't glorified humans yet. So, that's where that's where we got to do a little bit of guesswork, because we're not told exactly how the heavenly temple operates. We get little pieces, like in Revelation 8. There is an angel and it is an actual angel performing the heavenly temple duty of what would be the Day of Atonement.
Like incense.
Yeah. And so we get little hints of it. So it's like, okay, there are times where angels do perform some kind of duty here. So we do get that. But again, it makes a big distinction between angels and these 24 elders. And I think it's clear that the 24 elders are glorified humans.
Well, and we, when you go to Isaiah 6, and Isaiah sees the Lord and he freaks out. Oh man, I'm busted, right? Yeah. I'm a man of unclean lips and unclean people. And then we have an angel dispatched to go over to the altar to with some tongs and grabs a coal and comes over to his mouth and purifies it at that moment. And so that's what he went over to the altar. He went over to the altar of incense or whatever to pull out some burning coals. That's very priestly-ish. We're not saying they're priests because, again, as you mentioned in Hebrews chapter 2, angels, there's no salvation plan for angels. Right. We only get redemption for humans, the sons of Adam, which Jesus became one. But there is the function of this heavenly temple, which again is a pattern for down below. So I find it very interesting too. I think one last thing, and because I want to move on to some of the other descriptors that we both wrote about, but it's not surprising to me that we don't see the 24 elders in the Old Testament, because one thing, in the throne room scenes, they don't exist yet. Secondly, the church in Ephesians 2 and 3 is called a mystery. And by definition, a mystery was unrevealed in the Old Testament.
That's right.
And so you have that aspect that when you come to the book of Revelation, the final book, the church has already been revealed. Paul's been revealing it. And so now it can be revealed that this group can exist because has been revealed, and they're there now. And so there's a consistency there where I think people that try to see it, if you make the comparisons between, again, the Old Testament throne room scene anywhere and the New Testament, there's no contradictions, but this group, where'd they come from and why now? And it's interesting to me that metatauta, after these things, this group happens to show up in the throne, and which again I think gives us understanding. So let's talk about let's talk about some of the descriptions.
Yeah. So in the book I have 12 of them, and because in all of these I wanted to say what is everything we know about the 24 elders and how they're described, because there's nothing written in the Bible that was by accident. So everything's important, and I came up with 12 different things. And then I thought, okay, where do we see these other things? Because John is writing as if we should already know who these are. He describes them, but he doesn't just say, like, hey, these are this group. So where else in the Bible do we see these exact descriptions? And you can find every single one with promises made to us Christians if we overcome, and if we make it to the rapture, or our deaths, whichever comes first. But if you hold on to your faith throughout your life and you don't deny Jesus, you just hold on to your faith, these are the things that you're promised. Well, the first one is that there's 24 of them. Now that's the only one where you don't really get like a Christian version of that number, but we've already talked about that. That goes back to
let's develop that a little bit more, sure. Because for example, 1 Chronicles 24. It's very easy for people to remember. 24, 1 Chronicles 24. Where describe there what David did in coming up with 24. He could have had 36. He could have had 48.
Oh, and that's another interesting thing that I brought up too, is that there was actually, I think it was 38,000 in total. So the 24 are representative of a much larger group in the Old Testament temple, like how David set up. So there were all these other jobs, musicians, there were priests, all these other jobs. And that 24, that 24 courses, that represents this much larger group. And so it's not only 24, because some people think, well, there's going to be more than 24 Christians raptured, so that 24 number has got to be symbolic. And it's like, well, no, I have no issue with the fact that there are 24 specific people, 24 specific elders that are Christians. I don't know how they get decided. I don't know if they interchange like it was in the courses of the 24 in the Old Testament. I have no idea. It doesn't really tell us. But those could easily just be 24 specific Christians, and they represent a much larger group of every Christian that gets raptured and gets the rewards, and we all get jobs and stuff. So yeah, that's a really good point.
So for people, what we're saying here is, or what we're seeing is that in the Old Testament, David had this large group, and he's like, okay, in order to manage this, it makes great sense. We're going to divide everybody up into these 24 separate divisions, courses, however phrase. Courses is a biblical word, but it's just 24 different department heads.
Yeah.
Okay, let's use some modern language. And he's like, okay, we're going to have, and you list them in your article. And again, 1 Chronicles 24. Hey, these are the guys. So then, if David wants to talk about worship service, he's going to bring these 24 guys up. He's going to say, hey, look, bring them in. I want a meeting. I want an organizational meeting, right? So they come in, and he says, okay, this is what went well last week in the worship service, and this is what we want to do. And also, there's some issues going on with the temple administration or the maintenance. So hey, Joe, I know you're responsible for maintenance on things falling around. So you're going to talk to these 24. But those 24 are going to be real people, but they are going to represent all of the rest of this larger group.
That's right.
And so also you bring it up, and I bring it up as well in my article. But the consistency is that at least in two ways, they were responsible as priests and worship.
Yeah.
Now that's not coincidental for God. For number one, David made him in 24. And God takes that number and says, that's the number that I want to choose to represent the greater group, like David did. But it seems interesting that they represent at least the priests and the worshipers, which that's exactly what Revelation 1 says, right?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so we know that when we get our rewards, we're also going to get some task or some job. And now, and I don't think everybody does, because there are it does say, when we go through the Bema Seat judgment, that some people, all of their works, the wood, hay, all of it gets burned up.
Smelled by, they escape through fire, right?
Yeah, they're still saved, but they just don't get anything. So there will be people that probably don't have any jobs and don't have any rewards, but they're at least still in heaven. And that is largely dependent on how we live our lives and what we do for Jesus and all that. But and we also have, passages where it's like, well, to this one I'll give 5 cities, this one 10 cities. So everybody's going to be a little different depending on how we live our lives here, which is important. So that's going to determine our place in the millennium and what kind of things that we're going to be doing there. But yeah, some of the things that were promised. The one that you brought up, I have on this list as well. It's actually number 11, but God has made them kings and priests. So that's a descriptor of the 24 elders, but we find that in Revelation 1:6. That's a promise made to us. And like I mentioned, there's actually 12 of these. So we went through the fact that there's 24 of them. The second one I have is they're all sitting around the throne of God, and we see that promised in Revelation 3:21 in reference to Christians.
Don't go too.
Sure.
They're sitting.
Yep.
Okay. In the Old Testament temple, there was no chairs in there because the priests weren't sitting.
Right.
Jesus sat down. Okay, he also sat down on the throne of his Father, as you mentioned, Revelation 3. He says, "You'll get to sit down with me as I sat down on my Father's throne." So the fact that they're sitting is very, very important. They're on thrones, which is super important descriptors, according to Revelation 3:21. Nowhere are angels specifically that we see promised to sit on thrones. specifically in this regard. But here, the previous chapter says this, and now we're seeing this group. It would be really easy to go from chapter 3 into chapter 4 and go, oh, well, the promise he made to them is now being realized.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And again, it would have been an oversight for John to miss that if it wasn't supposed to be the same group. The next one, they're clothed with white raiment, and that's Revelation 3:4-5, that we're promised that if we overcome. They have crowns of gold on their heads. That's Revelation 3:11 and 3:18. And this is a big one, because everybody knows that this descriptor, we take this on as Christians. You even have like Christian bands that have this name and write songs about this, but that they worship God by casting their crowns before the throne. The 24 elders are doing that, but we read about that for us in Hebrews 4:16. So that's another big one. They give honor to God for all of creation. We're told to do that in Romans 11:36. The 24 elders are a different group than the four beasts, which I mentioned before, and we get that from 1 Corinthians 15:39-40, with the different flesh and things like that. They sing a new song, and that song is really important because that's a big one. But,
song of redemption.
Yep, it's all a song of redemption. Angels would have no business singing a song like that.
No.
Like no other creation besides glorified humans would be able to sing a song like that. And then I have a reference to Colossians 3:16 there. But they claim that Jesus has redeemed them by his blood. And we're even reminded of that in Revelation 1:5. Yep. So that's another descriptor. Nobody else can say that. Like no angel can say that. No other created thing can say that. So they come from here's another big one. This to me is like, obviously this isn't angels. They come from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. It says people.
Yep.
Like right in there in the description of the 24 elders.
As far as we know, angels don't have different languages or different ethnic groups or different nations.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And kindred, I mean that implies reproduction. And angels in heaven don't do that. And then I put the verse, Romans 1:16, where it says that, we as Christians, that's how we're described. We come from every kindred, tongue, people, and nation. And then we just talked about that God made them kings and priests, and we get that Revelation 1:6. And then the last one, the 12th one, is that the 24 elders, they rule with Jesus. And we're promised that in Revelation 2:26-27. So there, every single descriptor of the 24 elders can easily be accounted for, most of them just in one chapter earlier in Revelation. And then there's a few other that are kind of scattered around the New Testament, but every single description that we have of these 24 elders can be accounted for. And when we find those other places in throughout the rest of Scripture, it's always talking about Christians. It's always talking about what we're going to get when the rapture happens, when we die, the rapture, but when it's time for us to receive our rewards after the rapture, it's the same exact things that we're promised. So to me, it's like, this is like slam dunk proof of the pre-trib rapture. Because I would be interested to know, and I don't know what they say, because I haven't really heard any of them talk about this, but I would be interested to know, what the thought leaders in the post-trib camp, pre-wrath, mid-trib, multiple raptures, like what do they think about the 24 elders, and how do they explain it? Because it seems like the only way to get around it, they wouldn't be able to say that they're glorified humans and maintain their position. So what else is there? They would have to try to say that there's either some kind of angel, or it's some kind of massive allegory, and it doesn't really mean what it just literally says. And I don't think either one of those are really strong positions.
Well, it goes back to kind of what G.K. Beale, definitely not a pre-trib guy by any means, and again, he has, as we discussed, 6 different options for what they aren't, and for being non-glorified humans, and so there is, as we know, the book of Revelation certainly is filled with symbolism. We're not doubting that, but that symbolism, and not everything's a symbol, but when there is a symbol, symbols point to reality. It's not just an allegory that is not true. I think the other thing too is thinking about the white raiment in that they're clothed in white. When I chase this down, You see in Revelation 3:4, 3:5, 3:18, it's a very specific Greek phrase that is consistent with what you see with the 24 elders. So you see this white raiment that is promised to the church, but that's exactly what the elders are wearing. But there's other, like in Revelation 7, there's other language for angels that were wearing white, but it's different Greek word. It's a white robe or something else. And so John is very clear that when you have somebody be given a white robe, that's not the white clothes or white raiment, whatever. And so you think, okay, that's another very specific thing that if you chase it down, the consistency is totally there. And so the other thing that we can address is, now some people will say in Revelation 4:1, I saw a door opened in heaven, come up here, that's a sign of the rapture. Maybe, I don't think it's super airtight on that, but so even if we don't need that, is what I'm saying. We don't need that.
No.
But what I find fascinating is you see a gap between, at the end of chapter 3, the letter to the 7 churches, which are, it's a closure. Metatauta, after these things, it's like, hello, I just told you this in 119. Well, then all of a sudden there's this gap between the metatauta, when the church age, we've moved on from the church age, even in the writing of the book. And then before the scroll is handed out. And so when this whole drama takes place, who's worthy to open the scroll? Nobody's found worthy anywhere in heaven, on earth, under the earth. But then, of course, we know the Lamb appears, and he's counted worthy. And so what I find fascinating is not only are the elders there, they're seated, they're on thrones, they're putting their crowns. Where'd they get those at? Well, that's interesting that we know that the Bema seat, like you said, crowns are going to be given. We know that there's 5 crowns mentioned in the New Testament, and they're all referenced. We won't go into the details there. But they already have the crowns, so they're not in the process of getting them. They're already done. And then they're at it. They once they see the reality or the worthiness of the Lamb, they lay their crowns because he's worthy. But then they get to see and observe this whole interchange prior, and then they're there prior to when he opens the first seal and calling forth with the living creature the first horseman to come riding, which is a sign that we know from chapter 6:17 is a sign of God's judgment. So I think it's not mid-trib. It's not pre-wrath. It's even before the very first seal itself. And so a lot of people, even now, I think there's a lot of things that come into play here. There's people that believe that the seals have been opened. Okay. And which I disagree with that.
Yeah, me too.
But if the seals are opened, then that means the elders
they would already be there.
They would already be there.
Yeah, and that doesn't fit, because we know that we don't get those rewards upon our death. Because somebody might say, well, those are just the ones that have died already before, like when Jesus ascended or something, like the next day, there's something like that. But it doesn't fit, because we don't get those rewards at death. We're changed in an instant at the rapture, and that's the same for dead people and alive people. We all get our rapture at the same time. So there are Christians who have passed on right now, they don't have their glorified bodies yet. That happens at the rapture. So you would have to say that somehow they got their glorified bodies and they got all of their rewards early on before the rapture. But again, that doesn't fit with Scripture. So I'm and I got some good friends and stuff that believe that the seals have already started to be opened since basically right after Jesus ascended, and I very politely disagree with that. I just don't think it tracks. But because again, I mean, just to restate the point that you made, who are the 24 elders in that scenario? They can't be glorified humans. So you would again have to either allegorize the whole thing, or you would have to say that there's some kind of other spiritual being. But there's no being where these descriptors, especially their song that they're singing and that they're ruling with Christ, there's no other being where that makes sense.
Yeah, when the thrones being there, it's I mean, I guess hypothetically you could have that group as representative of non-glorified Christians, if they wanted to argue that. But it seems to be that the Bema seat seems to be a collective effort, that not, again, after you're dead, you go stand before the Bema seat, you get your crown. Because in Hebrews 12, you see other passages that no one's going to be, the church is all going to be perfected together.
Yeah, that's right.
And so to have them be perfected as it relates to either glorified body or their reward given as soon as they die seems a little problematic for other New Testament theological truth.
Yeah.
And so again, what we're seeing is, to summarize, we have all the descriptions that tie in very, very nicely with the raptured church having already gone through the Bema seat, received their crowns, and they're sitting down on the throne, getting ready for their Lord to then unleash his wrath in order to redeem that which he purchased, but the redemption of the earth and all of, so he can rule and reign in the cleansing takes a time. We believe that's 7 years. And so we get to witness that from beginning to end. And I find it interesting too that in John, Jesus says, I no longer call you servants. You're my friends. Yeah. And because you're my friends, I'm going to reveal to you what's going to happen. And so we get that the beauty of John 14, where Jesus says, I want to come back and receive you unto myself, and because it take you to where, there's in my Father's house, I'm preparing a place. I'll come back and take you there. And so when we go there, this is part of that.
Yeah.
And so we go through the Bema seat, and then we get seated, and he's like, is everybody ready? Let's begin the full redemption of the earth.
I know, isn't it beautiful? And it's the simplest and easiest explanation, where the text just explains it for you. And any other explanation I've heard of who this group is a lot of over explaining. You gotta add stuff to make it fit. You gotta disregard other things. It just, with the idea that these 24 elders are glorified Christians after the rapture, it just all fits together so beautifully. And to me, in my Bible study, when I've come across differences in opinions of things, usually just the simple, most straightforward answer that accounts for everything, that's going to be the
Isn't
right
this
answer.
Occam's razor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you're going to look at something, the simplest thing that is the easiest often makes the most sense.
Yep.
Not always, but most of the time. But at least we should start there.
Yeah.
Because you really get. I'm surprised that, honestly, of like G.K. Beale. I mean, he's a smart guy. I'm going to have a lot of his books, but to make the claim that they could even possibly be angels.
Yeah, it doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit, because all you got to do, anybody can just simply go through whenever the 24 elders are listed, write down what their speeches are, write down the song that they're singing, and who they're talking about, and yet angels don't speak that way.
Yeah, exactly. They really can't and be truthful. One other point too is some people have brought up, and there is a whole argument towards textual criticism for this, and I don't have all that memorized, but there are some people that say, well, the song that they sing, some Bible versions, they're not saying you redeemed us by their blood. They're saying you redeemed them, as if it was a different group, like talking about like they're not the humans, and they're talking like you redeemed the humans from with your blood and stuff. And there is an argument that I put a footnote in my book about that, because I didn't want to. It's a long argument. I didn't want to get into the whole thing, but Pastor Andy Woods has an excellent video on that, and I linked it in my book in a footnote. But we don't even need to really go there, because we already have biblical precedent for people when they have a new song singing that way, and it's in Exodus, I believe, chapter 15, was it?
Chapter 15.
Yeah, we have them singing a new song about
the song
something
of
that
Moses.
It
was right after they came out of the sea across God redeemed them from Pharaoh.
Yep. And in that song, they're not saying you redeemed us. They're singing you redeemed them. So we already have a biblical precedent for somebody to use those other kind of pronouns, even in speaking reference to themselves.
Especially in a poetic worship, they are singing. And so I think that idea is is kind of moot.
Yeah. I mean, I think the accurate translation is "You redeemed us."
Anyway, yeah.
I think that's already going to be the accurate. But even if it wasn't, even if it was proven, no, they are absolutely singing
Third person. Yeah.
If they were, well, it doesn't do anything to the argument because we see that in Exodus anyway. So,
and it doesn't
right,
get around
point.
with they come from every tribe, tongue, nation,
Exactly.
people. I mean, they're again, you don't have different groups like that of the angels.
That's
so, or somebody else. So I think putting that all together again, what's the easiest thing? The angels are clothed in different colors. The angels aren't sitting on thrones in the book of Revelation. They're busy standing and working, and we're not casting any aspersion on angels, at least at this point, at all. Crowns of gold. I don't see angels, wearing crowns of gold.
Right.
Those are very clearly, again, the crowns. Even the gold is very specifically. I make reference to it in my article about it that the golden crown is specifically. There's one figure in Revelation 10. But that seems to be Jesus for sure. But the same idea. He says, hey, I'm going to sit on my Father's throne. And Romans 8:17 and 18 is very clear too that we are joint heirs with Christ.
That's right.
Whatever he gets, we get.
Yeah.
Not because we're worthy. That's why we put our crowns at his feet. Because we know he's the one worthy. But that's the invitation that he gives to the church. And to say, listen, and that's Paul's whole big deal about coming in and being revealed as the sons of God in that regard, that we have this eternal destiny planned for us. And to me, in Psalm 2, when Jesus, when the Father says, I will give you the nations for your inheritance, we need to go, well, if he's getting inheritance, we get a piece of that.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what he says in the chapters of Revelation 2-3. He says, it says there, you'll rule and reign with a rod of iron with me because my Father gave me that, and you get to have that. So there's all this beautiful consistency with the promises to the churches, and then what we see there right there in chapter 4 and the rest.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like I said, it's a complete slam dunk for the preacher of rapture, and it makes everything fall beautifully into place.
Yeah.
And again, not disparaging other people of other views, but it's just when you're confronted with something that I think is this weighty and this convincing. Again, what are the other arguments? I'd be really interested to know, like what one of the leading thinkers in the post-trib camp would say about this. Well, that and if I go to prepare a place for you, I'm going to gather you. How does that work with the post-trib? Because I've never heard a good answer for that. Have you?
Well, yeah, actually I have.
Really?
I won't, well, not a good answer. I heard an answer. Okay. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I just mean it was an answer because I wondered that, and I won't say the person's name, but he's well known, but he gave a teaching on this. Somebody sent it to me. And I thought, what? I'm glad they sent this to me because he was describing John 14, in my Father's house, Jesus says, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe it also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go there to prepare a place for you, and I will come again and receive you unto myself. So you have that phraseology. Well, this particular person said, well, Father's house. Well, if you read the rest of the Gospels, the Father's house, and there is one spot in the Gospels where Jesus says, don't make my Father's house like a den of thieves. You've made okay. So the Father's house clearly was talking about the temple in that context.
Yeah.
And so this person was saying, based on that one I wouldn't say based on that one incident. I want to be fair to him. He was taking that to mean that this idea that this is a rapture to some faraway place is not true. And I'm thinking, okay, let's linguistically run with that for a moment.
Jesus said he goes to prepare a place. So is he going to the earthly temple then
and for what?
Yeah.
And there's many rooms in the temple, and he's going to bring millions, hundreds of millions back to this 37 acres and the temple's even smaller, right? I was thinking
it's going to be pretty cramped.
It's going to be pretty cramped. And I thought, is Jesus speaking in John 14? Look, I'm going to prepare a place in my Father's local temple. There are many rooms. I'm going to go there and prepare a place. And when I'm going to go, but I'm going to come back and then receive you to myself. That where I am, you may be also, right? That's the other phraseology.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus, when he was departing, wasn't departing to the earthly temple.
Right.
And so I find it interesting. It was quite, again, when you're a post-trib person, you have to deny that John 14 is some idea of a rapture away.
Yeah.
Because for them, you're basically not going rapture into heaven. You're being raptured to Jerusalem to up and down. Missler called it the yo-yo theory. We're coming up, we're coming right back down.
Yeah.
Which I think is true for. I think that's true for Matthew 24. 31, where he sends the angels to gather his elect, but they're bringing him to Jerusalem because he's returning.
Right.
But I find it interesting too that and I encourage people to do this. So in one of the messages I gave, I was reading John 14 one day, and it's great because software today we have is awesome. So I saw this phrase. He says, "So that where I am, you may be also." And so I was like, "That's a very." So I highlighted the Greek phrase, "Hapu emi ego." It's like where I am. So I highlighted it, and on my software I just hit right click and I said search for phrase, and it was like, and the results came back, and I was like, this appears nowhere except in the Gospel of John.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, and John is very much that way. He's got the 7 I am statements. He's got the 7 signs. He's got the 7 beatitudes. So John is very specific in his writing. And I thought John is using this language. And so if you chase down every one of those, and I think there might be 7 of them. All of them are referring to Jesus's departure into heaven.
Wow.
To go to his Father. And so if you take that phrase, where I am is in heaven with his Father, and you plug it into John 14, which it's exactly the same phrase. It's just, it's so consistently beautiful. Even all the accent marks are exactly identical. It's like, where I am, you may be also. Well, where is that? Every other place is heaven. So John 14 can't be the local temple.
That's right.
Now, obviously, practically it can't because there's not enough room.
Right.
But even there, cloaked within that, the language himself of what John is writing, it's like if you chase this down, there's this little nugget of, this is a very technical phrase for heaven. Because remember, he's talking to the people, and he says, "Look, where I'm going, you can't come." And they're like, "Well, where's he going?" And he says, "Well, where I am, where I am, you're not going to be able to go." And it was like, what? Is he going to go into dispersion? Is he going to exile? And he's talking about, "Father, I'm going to you. Father, I'm coming to you." So it's pretty fascinating.
I've got to read your article and watch your video because you picked out stuff that I had no clue about. That's the first time I've heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty fun, and again, it's all credit to the software that we have today, because it seriously was like 30 seconds, but praise the Lord that we can just see something and highlight it and click it. But for our listeners, let's give a wrap up here.
Sure.
If you can give a wrap up for what we're trying to say. The several items as it relates to the identity of the 24 elders.
Yeah, well, just basically that I believe, you believe that they're glorified human beings who have already been raptured and already got their rewards. And if we can prove that, here's the really important thing, because the rapture is supposed to be a comfort to us.
Yes.
This isn't, and it's crazy that Christians will fight tooth and nail over this thing. And really, it's like, well, we all believe in a rapture. It's just the timing aspect. So what kind of thing to get angry and upset about is that? And I've seen a lot of dispersion put on pre-tribbers because it's like, well, that's just escape theology and all this. It's like, well, don't you want to escape like what's coming? Like, I mean, I would want to if God offers me that.
Paul uses the word escape and Jesus uses the word escape. So we're...
Yeah, just going with the Bible.
Uh-huh.
Like, what's wrong with that? But it's supposed to be a comfort, and I think especially nowadays when people see the world the way it is and how bad it's getting, if they don't have the comfort, and I'm not saying every Christian's got to believe in the pre-trib rapture. I mean, I think they should, but I don't think it makes it has nothing to do with salvation. But if I wasn't a pre-trib rapture believer, I imagine I would probably have a lot more stress and worry in my life, seeing where this is going. And it's like, wow, we're not even in the tribulation.
And martyrdom. Like, we're all going to be martyred. Yeah. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of them are killed. 80, 90% are killed during the tribulation. So that's our future.
Yeah, and a lot of times these other camps, to try to soften that, they'll say, well, there's a protection. God's going to protect. That's not biblical at all.
Not true.
It says the Antichrist overcomes the saints.
Yep.
And also, why is it using the word saints and not church? And that's a whole other thing. It's obviously people who got saved after the rapture. They missed the rapture. They weren't saved back then. They got saved during the tribulation or just sometime after the rapture. So I think it can help out a lot if we can just if people can just open their minds and just at least allow for the possibility. Like just look at this one thing, the identity of the 24 elders. If we're right, there's really no way around it. It has to be pre-trib, and that's a really good thing. Don't
Yep.
you want it to be pre-trib? You know, I don't want it to be any of the other things. I don't base my beliefs based on what I want, but you know,
Right.
but
It's a comfort, though.
yeah, and that's in the Bible says that's what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to comfort each other with these words. So my decision to put this in the book and to, you know, and even what we're trying to comfort others with these words, you know, that Jesus is coming back, and it is going to be before this. We do get to escape this stuff, which is great. That doesn't mean that we go around sinning. It doesn't mean that we have a lack of preparedness for other disasters that might happen, because, you know, we get a lot of these kind of really baseless accusations sometimes, like, oh, well, you know, you're just not going to be prepared for anything, though. Like, no, I always tell people, you never know when a tornado is going to come, or a flood, or an earthquake. It's always good to have emergency supplies. But if you're doing that, preparing for the tribulation, those emergency supplies are not going to do you any good.
Yep, exactly.
They're not going to do you a bit of good. That is a waste of money. So really, it's just to provide comfort. And again, I can't overstate it enough. If we're right about who these 24 elders are, it's a slam dunk for the pre-trib rapture.
Yep.
I mean, like, case closed, it's settled. So, and I know that not everybody's going to accept it like that,
Yep.
because of course not. But
They keep us sharp, though. You know, I really
Yeah.
do. I appreciate the disagreement.
oh, sure, yeah,
'Cause-
especially when it's like nice and respectful.
Yep.
When they're, I don't like. I've got. Most of my friends are probably pre-wrath. You know, we don't really talk about the rapture a lot, but we don't fight about it. Obviously, everybody here we're pre-trib, but for a long time, for years, I was in the pre-wrath camp. And really it was, I can look back on myself. I'm not saying this about everybody. Well, maybe I am, but I know, at least for myself, it was due to a major lack of study and lack of understanding. Because when you're in a camp, when you're in a group, you tend to just listen to their interpretations, you know,
and
their reasons.
and their interpretations of what the other people are saying.
Yeah, yeah, and then that's how you compare what they say about the other people.
Yep.
That's how you compare. You don't really go out and look. And when I was raised pre-trib, but then after, like, I became a teenager, somewhere around there, I started having my mind change, because I was hearing all these other options that I wasn't exposed to before. And so for every rapture belief that's out there, there was a time in my life where I held that belief until after a while, I was just like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I'm just, Lord, it's in your hands. If you want me to know, you're going to have to let me know somehow, because I don't know what I'm doing. I can't make a decision here. And so for a while after that, I just didn't really study it, didn't look into it. And but God brought me through a lot of other Bible study that I didn't realize actually has a lot to do with the rapture. And and I realized that I just didn't have that foundation that I needed. And so when it came time for God to say, okay, I'm going to try to show you the pre-trib rapture again, you know, when it came time for him to bring me back into the rapture study, it just clicked, because I had all this foundation now.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, wow, these other camps, these other interpretations, they have major flaws that really can't be reconciled. And I'm not saying all of them, but I wonder if that's why many of them are so angry. You know, because if you hold a belief and you make it a point, like, this is almost like an identity, like, I'm a pre-wrath guy, and then somebody challenges that, even if it's a respectful challenge, but challenges it in a way that you can't really answer. I mean, that can be stressful, you know, especially if there's ego or pride or anything involved with that. So all that to say, like, I'm not complaining about any of the other people in any other camps. I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I did. But I will tell you, since coming to this realization and since having that foundation and being able to really show evidence, not just, this is only one piece of evidence, there's a lot more.
Yeah, exactly.
But to show strong evidence that, yeah, guys, it is pre-trib, it really is, praise God, that's the best one out of all of them, that's the one that you want, you know, and it's actually true. It just fits so smoothly. It does take a lot of stress off, because it's like, the tribulation is not anything anybody can really prepare for, because it's going to be so horrible.
You can't prepare for it.
There's no way.
There's no way.
And it just shows just another layer of how much Jesus really loves us. I mean, we're the bride of Christ. Is he a wife beater? You know, I mean, if we're in the tribulation, we're under some of the judgments of God, at least some of them. I mean, because the next closest one would be mid-trib. So we're even if we had to go through the first half, well, Jesus is still breaking the seals. He's the one doing it.
He's the one doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's not going to beat his wife like that, you know. So it just shows even more deep how much he loves us, how much he cares for us, and wants to take care of us, and wants us to rest in that peace. So that's the main message I want to get across is that.
Yep. Amen. And for those listening today, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. In many ways, we just kind of scratched the surface, but more food for thought for everybody. And hopefully we'll see all of you in Colorado. If we don't, maybe in Branson or other spots along there, but hopefully we'll see you next week for sure.